Welcome to the DeFi Podcast, where we discuss all things DeFi. We host in-depth discussions with industry leaders with a focus on the Avalanche ecosystem. The content of this podcast is for informational purposes only. Statements made by hosts or guests reflect their own beliefs and opinions and is not investment advice. The hosts or guests may have personal investments in any assets being discussed.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the DeFi Podcast, where we discuss any and all things crypto. Today is November 7th, 2 days after the elections here in the United States. This week, we have the whole crew. Everyone is back from beautiful Avalanche Summit Latam in Argentina. We had an incredible episode with the founder of Avalabs there, which you should really check out if you haven't already. It's on the DeFi Podcast YouTube channel. But today, we're going to dive into the election results here in the US and what it means for business more broadly, what it means for specifically crypto, which we all really care about, of course. And we're going to spend some time discussing maybe this year's standout and definitely this week's standout crypto application, which is PolyMarket. So before we get into all that, first, I just want to introduce all of our hosts. We have the whole crew today. So joining us today live, we have JF. JF is a longtime Web3 builder and currently the head of DeFi at GoGoPool, which is a liquid staking platform on Avalanche. JF, how are you doing, bud?
Good. Good morning.
And we have next Jared. Jared is our true crypto OG. He started mining Bitcoin blocks over a decade ago, and he's been involved in the crypto space ever since. Jared, how are you doing? Have you recovered okay from the Avalanche Summit? It sounded like you were pretty sick when we were there.
Yeah, I was fine.
And we have also Rhett. Rhett is the founder of Gravita, an ETH-focused borrowing protocol, which we have time. We should talk about the new stuff that's happening with Gravita today, too. Rhett, some exciting things happening there. He's also the founder of Avant, a new protocol which aims to create the best yield-bearing stable value token that you can find on any chain. And finally, I'm Bill. I'm a boring former TradFi guy who fell down the crypto rabbit hole in 2019. And now I run a hybrid trading and investment company called Daybreak Digital. Okay, so let's get started. So guys, this is a big week. I mean, the election has real consequences. And, without talking, I don't want to talk politics and larger, but in terms of people who are working in the builders space, not just crypto, but building specifically, is a really motivational outcome. You had people like, Elon Musk and Naval and Mark Andreessen and many other people just saying that, okay, like it's time to start building again. Let's get a lot of the red tape out of the way and let people in the United States who are working at startups, like some of you guys, and working at places that are building new technologies like, rockets and artificial intelligence and crypto and, whatever else, just built, and it was a really motivational week. I mean, when we woke up on Wednesday morning, I definitely felt different than I did on Tuesday morning. How did you guys feel? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, can I just launch into my sort of take on, I think, American business and what this does?
Yeah, of course.
I think we're in a very special place. You have a couple of things coming together. So you have, obviously, the presidency is going to be on, one team, and then that same team has Congress, probably going to have the House. And then you also have the judicial system. So you have like all three parts of government that you need to get things done. And you also have someone who's like super motivated, right? So I think after two assassination attempts, that's going to focus someone and they're going to want to get things done. Then you have this incredible team, obviously, under that person. I'm thinking specifically about people like Elon, Vivek, Ron Paul doing this Department of Government Efficiency. I've never seen someone do head cutting in the way that I've seen Elon cutting down on headcount in the way that he did at Twitter. Uh, One can only imagine, like in government, when he's able to do that. If you can get regulation out of the U.S. economy, like overregulation out of the U.S. economy, and let builders build, this economy is going to be just incredible. So, like, obviously, this has like huge repercussions for crypto, but I'm actually more. My mind goes to the overall economy and how competitive the US is going to be compared to everyone else. The US is already the number one economy in the world, but uh, in 5 to 10 years, if you can get the atrophy and all the government overreach and just all that overregulation and paperwork that you need to get through to get anything done, if you can get that out of the system, that makes me just so incredibly bullish for this economy. And I can't even imagine like how far things can go and how fast things can go. So yeah, those are my sort of starting thoughts.
Rhett, actually, Rhett, do you mind if I lean on you? Because you and I have had some conversations offline about, other technologies. Like, of course, you have experience with data science and artificial intelligence. You know a lot about nuclear energy. We've talked about defense tech. Maybe these are some areas where, and obviously like Elon Musk's companies, aside from also crypto, you're intimately familiar with. When you look at the landscape of these types of businesses, first, do you agree that it's going to be a big unlock for these businesses? Maybe you don't think that. I don't know. But if you do, like, which one of those industries do you think is going to experience the biggest unlock with come January?
Yeah, my expectation is that it's a big improvement from a business perspective, including all the industries you just mentioned. I think probably the biggest burden to most industries, the biggest burden to crypto has been just like a full-on like attempt to kill the industry. So Operation Choke Point going away and the SEC changing to a less hostile group, like that's like an insane difference. For the others, excessive regulation is like the biggest issue. And it's partly why like home prices are out of control as well. It's like it's too hard to build new homes. And it's, Elon Musk has talked about with launching rockets that it's literally they can design and build a new type of rocket faster than they can get a piece of paper signed to give them approval to do so, which is just insane. So that piece, it's unbelievable. Yeah. So that piece is the most important piece here. Like with the Department of Government Efficiency, like I think getting spending under control is a big deal. Cutting down, regulatory headcount, cutting, resolving some of the big spending items to get like the U.S. spending under control is really important. But from an efficiency standpoint, if they can start chopping down regulation faster, that would be a huge deal, I think. I think also there was the Chevron case that happened this year. So the Supreme Court basically revoked this Chevron doctrine, which basically had turned regulators into pseudo legislators because they had just this pretty wide mandate to be able to, expound the law within their regulatory purview. And that was, I think, a big problem that led to a lot of excess regulation. That's gone now. That plus people coming in and attempting to, I'm hopeful that some of the attempts to like truly chop down regulation will really help. I think that's the biggest thing of all. It's just so hard to build certain things. And it's super important to like some of the key industries you mentioned. I've talked for a long time about the need for us to start deploying some of this new nuclear technology. It's super cheap. It's super clean. It's really safe. It's much safer than people even realize because the newer generations of plant are like extremely better than like the Gen 3 plants from decades ago. And I think with some of the regulatory burden getting chopped down, that'll help. And then I think the other big thing here is the demand for power is so enormous that we're getting this like, everyone building these AI training data centers, they basically need nuclear plants sitting next to them in order to have enough power. And I think that insane demand is also going to help drive the nuclear thing. I think, honestly, of them all, just mass deployment of nuclear would be probably the biggest deal in the US, in my opinion.
Yeah, for both AI and for crypto, right? I mean, I don't know how much of a difference maker it would be. I mean, obviously, cheaper energy will help. I didn't realize it's as big of a driver for AI. Is that right?
AI is driving a lot of energy demand. And so it's like, okay, let's restart some of these nuclear plants, or let's start deploying some of these small modular reactors next to next to, AI facilities. I think that's a big deal. You mentioned defense. I'm actually, we were talking about this, defense is like 15% of the budget. Like it's not the biggest place you can save money. That would be Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. But it is one of the bigger items. And I think most Americans, I think a lot of people on the right have this like dilemma of, hey, we want to spend less, but we also want a strong military. And with the rise of some of these newer defense contractors like Anduril, I actually think you can get both at the same time. If we just moved more of our acquisition of new military tech to things like Anduril, you might be able to chop the military budget by a few $100 billion and have a stronger military at the same time. So I'm pretty hopeful of some of these newer like defense startups. I'm not a big expert in that area, but I'm pretty hopeful in just how they approach things.
Jared, can I put you on the spot for a second and ask about, I mean, I don't want to dox you, but you're not in the US. I think we may have mentioned on the podcast before, Where You Live. I'm not going to say it unless you're comfortable saying it, but how is it being received where you are? How do you feel about the outcome of the election?
I think there's some general optimism from people here, just like in the States, especially considering, the U.S. is Canada's biggest trading partner. Whatever happens in the U.S., a lot of it ends up just kind of trickling down into Canada anyways, unless, our government has something to say about it. And in that case, it's like, that's bad. So yeah, I think a lot of people here feel very similar to the way the people in the States feel, unless they're Trudeau voters, but let's not talk about that. I do have a couple of points on the election, though, because, so I may be bullish on crypto. I'm not bullish on everything. So enter Perma Bear. I think there are a few significant challenges that are going to face the next few years of geopolitics in the U.S. I mean, the first one is there is definitely raging tensions that are being heightened all the time in the East, let's say. And I think that some of those may calm down, some of those may increase, especially considering my point two. When you look at, so in the last couple of years, Trump has been exposed to a couple of really weird scenarios. One of those being all of those frivolous lawsuits that came up against him. And really, when you look down into the actual legal details of those lawsuits, the lawyers pursuing the cases against him were pleading to the judges, please don't take legal action against us for filing these ridiculous lawsuits. Those were actual words said in the closing of those court cases. However, the funds required for Trump to front was very much real, and they were very, very large. And he did not necessarily have the funds to get away with those things, and so he did have funders who helped him afford those things, and those funders were not doing it out of the kindness of their own hearts. Obviously, they have political agendas, they have things that they want, and at some point they may come knocking saying hey, you're not in jail because of me, now I want something from you. So I think a lot of those people are not the kind of people that we would think of as being, in the same line, the same vein as where Trump and Elon are currently thinking. They're much more on the neocon side of things. Those are the kind of people who are banging the war drums. So that's an issue. There's also the people who have been hell-bent on keeping the American economy in a decent state by any means necessary for the last 4 years. And those people are definitely not Trump allies. So they don't necessarily have an incentive for them to keep trying to, make things seem a little bit better than they are in reality. So, yeah, I think there are a couple of significant challenges. A lot of them are economic. Some of them are kind of, geopolitical. Obviously, there's a lot of optimism, but I think some of the optimism should still definitely be tempered by there are some real significant challenges ahead.
Okay. Yeah, definitely the beariest take of all of us as usual, Jared. Yeah. Dude, JF, what is this? What is this tweet you have up right here? Okay. So talent and academics will leave the US. The EU member states should initiate tech talent visas.
This is a random opinion from a sort of an academic person. It's just so I thought it was an interesting tweet to look at. I think it's 50% right in terms of the desire that's gonna sort of come out of this. Meaning, I do think that I don't think anyone's gonna move. So the academics, I think, are going to want to move out. I don't think being in the US is necessarily going to be, in the next 10 years, the best place for academics. But I think for builders, it's really the opposite. I think as a builder, I'm much more likely to want to move to the US in this new environment where there's much less regulation, and we care about the economy. We care about just reining in the federal government. We're just sort of curious to see what your thoughts would be on that.
I could see that split. Yeah, the academics leaving and the innovators coming, potentially. That makes sense. One other quick thought that I had on the defense side of things, highly recommend this recent discussion on the A16Z podcast with Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz about robotics and drones, et cetera. They're talking about how with complex manufacturing, to make a car, you need to make 1,000 other things. And if you're missing any one piece, you can't, in your home country, than you are dependent on someone else to make the thing at all. And, creating manufacturing companies in the US is like super hard right now, like extremely hard. But the future of the defense industry is like very obviously going to be driven by both drones and like robots. And it turns out that China has they have the best drone company and the best drone supply chain in the world. So they can make the drones and all the parts for the drones. And I guess like US military buys most of their like smaller like personal drones from China. And then similar with robots, they have an entire robot supply chain. You can now buy those robot dogs from Chinese companies, but the US does not have those things. And so unless we can build like proper manufacturers to be able to create all the subcomponents, et cetera, it's like the best case scenario is we're dependent on a friend, and the worst case scenario is we're dependent on a rival or potential enemy, like in the case of war for some of the most important like defense tech. So actually, like from that perspective, for like the US being like strong in defense, like the reduced regulatory burden, I think will be really important to like enable like actual like manufacturing, because those types of businesses are particularly hard to start in the US. It's kind of insane that Elon Musk started a successful car company and a rocket company, like these things that are doing like manufacturing, because that type of business is like, it's like almost been made illegal in the US, and you can see with how much difficulty they've had. So that piece I just wanted to touch on and highly recommend the A16Z discussion.
Cool. Yeah, I'll check that out. Yeah, there's some special scrutiny that SpaceX comes under because it's like a national defense tech company, essentially, right? Yeah. So to do that and be successful is just insane. But let's talk about the impact of deregulation. Let's move on to the second topic, which is the impact of deregulation the impact of the election's outcome specifically to crypto, right? So there's a whole bunch of things. So first of all, like Gary Gensler, like you're fired. Like, thank God. Like this guy has just been sitting like a wet blanket on crypto for years and adding no value, going after good actors and doing nothing to stop bad actors. So he's gone. I wonder what's going to happen to him afterwards. I hope it has nothing to do with crypto. And all of the lawsuits that they've been taking against like the best actors in the industry, hopefully those will get dropped like maybe even before January, but definitely like in January, all those things are going to get dropped. Operation Choke Point 2.0, which was basically like this for the government to make sure that crypto companies couldn't get banked, which is a huge problem in the US. That's going to be eliminated. I mean, this might take a little while, but banks should, in a reasonably, quick timeline, get more comfortable with banking crypto startups, which is huge. That's also really important. I think common sense stablecoin legislation is probably going to come soon, but I did go to a crypto conference yesterday, and there was I won't say who it was, but a very senior person from BlackRock was asked about what he thinks about stablecoin legislation. And he had a bit of a contrarian take. I'll just voice it here because it was an interesting opinion. He said, look, imagine for a second that the outcome had been different and Kamala Harris had won and the Democrats had taken over one of the House or the Senate. There really is, if we had a divided government, there really would have been very little legislation that could have been passed, right? Because both sides kind of disagree on a lot of things. But at least with stablecoin legislation, both sides, except for maybe the Elizabeth Warren wing, both sides know that some sort of legislation needs to be passed. It's actually an important national security matter for the dollar to maintain dominance everywhere, including in crypto. So he was saying, like, look, now it's one party government and they have a ton of different things that they can get done. There's no guarantee that they'll necessarily focus on stablecoin legislation immediately. So he's like, maybe that might actually get pushed out a bit. I don't know if that's true, but maybe a little bit of a contrarian point of view to keep in mind. It might not come as soon as we think it does. Another interesting thing is like maybe this is some hopium for ETH holders, which is that it's probably not going to be long before you can buy an ETF where you get access to staked ETH, which would be really, I think, popular for a lot of retail buyers. And there were a couple other things I was thinking about, but what else? Like, what are the other major impacts on crypto for you guys? Actually, Rhett and JF, for you guys, I'd love to hear your opinions too, because I know either you're in the US or you're thinking about coming to the US. As a result of the elections, how do you feel about that? Like, staying in the US or moving to the US, how do you guys feel?
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, Jared, if you can put up the tweet by Elon from an eternity ago, I think it's good to remember that. So two of the people who could be on this efficiency committee and probably with Elon leading it are Elon and Ron Paul. Elon has had many run-ins with the SEC. and absolutely hates the SEC. I mean, I think he tweeted like, "I have no respect for the SEC."
Yeah, he said in an interview on 60 Minutes, he's like, I want to be clear, I have no respect for the SEC, which was just so based.
So
Yeah.
this is going to be the person sort of like driving this refactoring, which is extremely bullish, beyond I think anything we could have imagined before, right? Like, so Elon's been, joined this recently. We were thinking if maybe like 3 to 6 months ago, if there's a Trump presidency, probably the SEC gets reformed. But now you have the guy who absolutely wants to destroy that agency, who will be in charge of sort of like pushing or rolling the ball there. The other person, I'm also super bullish on Vivek, who has talked a lot about like legislatively how you would actually get all these things done. So I think he has a really good handle on that. I think he has a legal background as well as being like a CEO and just a obviously super bright individual. But really, Ron Paul potentially joining this would be extremely, I think, bullish. Ron Paul has talked about ending the Fed forever. He's been running on this for like 20 years. So if you have this group in charge of, reforming the SEC, it's going to be a new world that I think we cannot really imagine. So for crypto builders, to me, the US becomes the prime destination. There just isn't any other place that you would want to build, because A, you're going to have this new found regime, but B, the center of finance is the United States. So you put those two things together, that's obviously the place you want to be.
Yeah, on the Ron Paul thing, just real quick, Rhett, like on the Ron Paul thing, like I love seeing it, I mean, I'm a huge fan of him from, whatever he ran like 18, 16 years ago or whatever. But the guy's really old. Like, I don't know how much, I love the influence that he might have.
Yeah.
I love that back in the day, he had the courage to walk into the lion's den, the Republican primary, and tell them like, hey guys, maybe invading Iraq was like a bad idea. It was like a breath of fresh air at the time. And he kind of opened my eyes to libertarianism and all these things. And it was cool to see him become part of the movement. But I'm like, I hope it actually amounts to something and not just like an election day vote grab. You know what I mean?
We haven't heard him speak for a while, and we don't know exactly what his role could be or would be, but I think you just put like hyper talented, smart people in a room, and you're probably going to find some use for everyone, right? So even if Ron Paul's use is just getting buy-in for these things, or just writing the sort of like headline of how this is supposed to play out, or dealing with like larger issues. I don't think Elon is going to be I hope Elon's not going to be micromanaging all these all this whole process, right? So he's going to need some help.
Yeah. I have heard rumors that Hester Peirce might be the next SEC chair, that she's like a favorite for that. I've read all of her kind of opinions on some of the SEC actions. Like she'll post like her public opinions on these things. She's super smart. She understands crypto. She's like even-handed. She actually has good ideas on how to approach it, and has talked about like the excessive government overreach of the SEC specifically with crypto. So she would be amazing. Just putting her as the head and then having them come up with like digital asset specific regulations would be amazing. And she's proposed what some of those could look like, and that would be a big deal. I think one thing that people outside of the industry don't realize is like, we're in such a dysfunctional place that the lowest risk thing that a founder could do is launch basically a meme coin, because if you do anything with any utility whatsoever, you're suddenly at risk. Which, imagine that if like, hey, you can IPO your company just fine so long as the company does nothing useful. But if it does anything useful, you're at risk of getting sued. It's like bizarre and really concerning. And so I actually think, so it's interesting, the day of the election, crypto was mooning, but DeFi was mooning super hard. So it was like ETH was up like 8% or something. A bunch of the others were similar. Bitcoin up like in the same range. And then a lot of the major DeFi tokens were up like 20+% on the day. And so I think this could be the start of a DeFi renaissance. And it may, a lot of the attraction of meme coins may start shifting toward DeFi, because I think people have just been afraid to play in that space. And Uniswap, which if they turned on their fee switch would be a money-making machine, they've been afraid to ever do that because they're constantly getting sued by the SEC for no reason. And they're US-based, so they have to be hyper cautious. Like, all of that's on the table now. They could actually like monetize potentially. I think DeFi specifically is probably within crypto the biggest winner.
This conference that I went to yesterday, I was hearing a lot about liquid crypto funds who have institutional LPs who are a bit more conservative. basically being much more bullish on the sterling DeFi coins, like before, or maybe even the market pricing ahead of time that even, regular financial institutions, which basically right now cannot hold crypto because the capital charge against them are so punitive, just anticipating that, hey, like these guys are going to be able to hold crypto. Yeah, there'll be some capital charge that they have to hold against it, but it won't be punitive. What's the first thing they're going to buy? They're not going to go buy meme coins. They're going to go buy the things that are actually parts of products that are being used in DeFi. So yeah, there's just a lot of green shoots happening right now if you just look at price action, and it's kind of heartening to see.
Yeah, I think that's right. One quick thing on overhang, by the way, is like, I think we still might get Gary doing some destructive things in his final days because he's not going to be gone this week. Yeah. And I was kind of thinking that they would like wait and see and decide, if they're going to keep going after crypto companies. But literally the week before the election, they sued Immutable. And Immutable is also a really good actor. They're a layer 2 that's really focused on the gaming vertical. They're a good actor. They haven't done anything weird. And they got their Wells notice like 5 days before the election. And so they do seem to be still going after people, and they're going after the good actors. I haven't even seen them yet go after like a scammer.
It's kind of crazy, actually. So I've done this. I was talking to some people in Argentina about this. Like, imagine for a second that you got scammed. Like, you invested $10,000 in a protocol and you got scammed. Who would you rather call? Like, would you rather call Gary Gensler at the SEC and be like, hey, man, like my name is, such and such, and I lost $10,000 investing in a DeFi protocol? Or would you rather call Zach XBT from crypto Twitter to help you? Like, a random, anonymous, pseudo-anonymous crypto account. Like, one is the head of the SEC, like a multi-billion-dollar agency with like thousands of employees. And one is like some random dude with a WASI Twitter profile. Like, it's like,
he's the one that will help you.
Yeah, and because Gary Gensler is probably not going to help you, and he might punish you, right? Like, whereas like this dude is actually going to get shit done like immediately if he has the time. Like, it's just like, what are these guys even doing with all these? It's insanity. It's just pure. Thank God he's going to be gone. Yeah.
You go to Gary Gensler, he's going to be like, you invested in what? Did you pay taxes on that? Are you reporting all of your gains?
And even if you are, which I am, I'm reporting everything, like they're still going to find some reason to just make your life hell. Like, no thanks,
I just want to add on to Rhett's point. I think there's definitely a real concern that a lot of these people who kind of see the end of the road for their current positions in government, there's nothing stopping them from breaking as many things before they're, we've got like 2.5 months to go before, 2.5 months to go before Trump is in that position. And how long is it going to take for him to actually start making changes within these different government agencies, right?
He's already having meetings with heads of other states. This guy is hitting the ground running, man.
No, I understand, but he's not the president for 2.5 months, right? And then once he becomes president, how quickly can he send the notice to Gary Gensler that Gary Gensler is fired? And how many people are gonna try and get in the way? My point is, there is some period of time where some of these people are going to see what's in store for them. And why wouldn't they send out as many Wells notices as possible?
Stop, man. Again, just closing out the topic on like the most bearish take. It's a good week, Jared. It's a good week.
Maybe we should just let Jared open topics so that, we're not all like going home depressed.
Yeah, I do have a counterpoint to that. So there's a green shoot, which is that one of the cases being brought against Trump was already dropped. They're like, well, we can't prosecute a sitting president. He's going to be sitting president. And I think some people thought that they were going to still keep bringing that against him until the day he was put in office and then cancel it. But they early canceled. Gensler seems more sinister than that, and so I think he keeps going after crypto companies the next few months, but maybe he does take note there and back off, who knows.
So let's move on to the last topic, which is actually a really fascinating topic with PolyMarket and how it did during the election week. Okay, so for those listeners that we have who may not have heard of PolyMarket, it's this betting website that works on crypto rails. I think it's built on Polygon. And basically, you can bet on whatever you want. And it became the focal point of the election because they had a ton of volume, over $3 billion worth of trading volume on just who's going to win the presidential election. But then they had, polls, or they had prediction markets for a ton of other outcomes, like the Senate seats, the House seats, who's going to win the Electoral College, the popular vote, all these things. And what's really interesting is that going into the election, the so-called experts had the election at basically 50-50. Like Nate Silver had that tweet, which I should have included. I'm sorry I didn't, where he said, yeah, we ran 80,000 simulations and in 40,000 of them, Kamala wins. Like, okay, like, thanks for the analysis, jackass. Like, what are you even doing over there? But PolyMarket had it not that different, actually. Like the betting odds had it at like 62% chance of a Trump win. So not massively different, but at least it's not, one guy sitting in an ivory tower expressing his opinion based on some, expert analysis that he did, but it's more the wisdom of the markets. And the really interesting thing was, like, I started out election night, probably like you guys, like I had going back and forth between CNN, NBC, MSNBC, like those channels. And then, and on my laptop, I was watching PolyMarket and Twitter. And eventually, like, I just turned the TV off because they were so far behind. Like, like everything I was seeing on PolyMarket, they were getting to like 2 or 3 hours later. So at some point I just muted it and then I turned it off. And like by 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night, PolyMarket had the presidential election at 90+%, it was like 95% or something for Trump. And I was like, okay, it's time to go to bed. And I went to bed, and I was like, it's over. But, the mainstream media kind of had all this stuff. They had to milk it basically all night long. They hadn't even called a single swing state by the time I went to bed, I think. Yeah, maybe I'll just pause there because I have a lot to say about PolyMarket. I could go for another 10 minutes. But were you guys using it, watching it? What did you guys think?
That's like the main thing I was paying attention to. And you're right, it was like way more predictive and responsive. It's funny, I saw a clip of one of the news agencies discussing Georgia as if it was like still like, who knows which way it goes. And they're like, okay, Trump's ahead by 118,000 votes, but there's still 100,000 votes to come in. And you're like, okay, if all of them went Kamala, she still loses. Why are you talking about this right now? And it's like, if 100% of them went Kamala, she loses, So that's kind of weird. I've actually been a fan of Nate Silver for a long time. He's a pretty good data scientist, I feel like. But like, for one, his models are all based on polls. And I think the quality of polls, it erodes more and more all the time because, like, I never answer unknown phone calls anymore because they're almost all scams. And so it's just like, if I ever got called by a pollster, I wouldn't even be answering the phone. And I think that's becoming more and more a thing. So I think polls are less accurate. I think these prediction markets are taking into account other things. Not to gloat, but like I tweeted back in September, and actually even PolyMarket at the time had Kamala at like 52. And I just mentioned that it seemed like it was going to be a landslide. And there's a number of things that were like indicating that to me. But like a lot of things that you can look at publicly, like, you can look at like the nature of social engagement with different groups on social media from like, say, 2016 and 2020 to now. But then also even just if you look at how received like some of the podcasts were, like Kamala was on Call Her Daddy, the podcast, it got like less than 800,000 views. And then Trump was on Rogan and it got like roughly 100 million views.
Despite the fact that they hid the fucking result on YouTube, and they removed it from the trending page. Like I was like, dude, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
It didn't make any sense.
And it still had, in total, between YouTube, Spotify, Twitter, X, etc., it had something in the order of like 100 million views before the election. So some of those differences, it was like, to me, it was so obvious that compared to 2020, the sentiment had shifted towards Trump. And even just from, like an observation of people around me, in previous elections, I knew no one on the left that would ever vote Trump and lots of people on the right who refused to. And then in this election, I know lots of people who are lifelong Democrats that were voting Trump. And that was like, at least in my own kind of people I know, I never saw that in the previous two elections. So it seemed so obvious that it was going to be a landslide. And then Nate Silver's like, oh, it's a dead heat. And you're like, dang, like, he's fallen really behind the prediction markets in quality, I think.
Jared, can I ask you to bring up this clip because it's going to, there's one there, I'm sure everyone saw it. It's like a 20-second clip from CNN. Well, basically, I'm sure you guys saw this clip, but on CNN, they showed like all of the districts for Joe Biden. And then they said, okay, like now all of the counties. Show all of the counties where Kamala Harris outperformed Biden. Did you guys see this clip? They had a map of the United States. And there was like not a single county where she outperformed Biden. I was like, that cannot actually be true. Like there's over 3,000 counties in America and she didn't outperform in a single one. I think it wasn't, obviously all the numbers are not in yet, but that stat to me is insane. Like how can that actually be true?
So I saw that same clip, and I don't know if it got approved or not. I didn't have a chance to chase it down, but I saw a proposed community note on that tweet for me to rate or whatever. And they were saying that on that clip, they had actually clicked the wrong button. And when they ended up later clicking the right button on where she outperformed Biden, it was still almost none, but it wasn't zero. It was like close to zero,
it couldn't be
but not
zero,
true
dude.
zero.
It can't be,
But
right?
she lost every battleground state. She lost the popular vote. Like the diff between her and Biden is like pretty insane. So I wouldn't have been that surprised. But yeah, I can't verify either way because I saw that claim and then I saw the clip and I'm not sure which is true, but I was like, either way, even battleground states that like had her massively favored, she lost badly in. It's
the PolyMarket story to me is just so fascinating because it's basically a microcosm of what's happening with crypto and institutions at large. Basically like crypto saying, hey, like there's a better way to do a lot of the things that you guys have been doing for a while that have just become kind of stultified, right? And before the election, a ton of mainstream news outlets were like, oh, PolyMarket is like, it has a bunch of wash trading, as if wash trading would do anything about where the market actually is. This is going to increase volumes. He said, it's a bunch of crypto bros. It's like it's invested in by Peter Thiel. Like there's a bunch of overseas investors like that. Therefore, the PolyMarket odds cannot be right. But it turns out it's significantly better than the so-called experts, right? And this is why I love the PolyMarket story. So Hasib Qureshi has this great thread where he talks about all this stuff in detail that I encourage everyone to go read. It's one of the links up there if you want to click on it. Jared, I'm not going to read it, but he has this great Twitter article that goes through all the before, during, and after what's going on with PolyMarket. And it's just this beautiful thing where like, look, like, there is sometimes a new, better way to do things. And like, we should be at least a little bit, he's talking to kind of the journalists. There should be a little bit of humility and curiosity when something comes along and out, like this giant polling institution or whatever, this polling industry. But there just is none. Like there's no, I guess the market's just going to move on. Like no one's going to pay attention to polls and these mainstream media and, TV channels anymore come election night. We're just going to all be tuning into PolyMarket, which I think is just a beautiful thing,
I think it's beautiful too. I think, by the way, the people who were like, oh, this is getting manipulated by Trump fans or whatever, I think you could have easily argued that the Trump odds were understated because an easy way for a crypto person to hedge their crypto exposure is just bet on Kamala. And there probably was at least some of that happening. And so, yeah, those claims I think were just, honestly, it was just cope by people who didn't want to believe that to be true. Plus, even if like you're like, hey, I want to manipulate the odds in order to affect the outcomes, it's not even clear you'd want to make it look like Trump was way ahead. You might want to make it look like he's way behind to get like Trump supporters scared to go vote. So like those sorts of conspiracy theories I find like really like silly. There's going to be an interesting pushback from people like Elizabeth Warren who are going to want to ban these prediction markets, but luckily I don't think she's going to have any power to do so.
Unlike France, did France just ban this stuff after that French whale like made all the money on the elections? It's kind of nuts, right?
I didn't hear that.
So. Yeah. Anyway, listen, I think we have a hard stop, so we're going to wrap it up there. We could rant on and on about the election, but I don't know that anyone is going to want us to do that. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for another episode of the DeFi Podcast, and we'll see you guys next week. Take care.
Ciao.